folks. Welcome to Education. I'm sorry, not Education Matters. This is Our City Matters. So we can get into some larger issues and more issues. And today we have George Lambert with us. And George is running for Senate in 2016. So we're a little bit ahead of the game here, seems like.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk about how you're preparing for that run in, well, I guess it begins now.
Oh,
welcome, George.
Thank you. It always does. Politics is really the New Hampshire sport. And, this is what we'll call spring training for the next election cycle.
Okay.
We're out. I'm out with my team helping to introduce people to presidential candidates because you can't actually swing a cat without actually hitting someone running for president nowadays, I believe is the old joke. So that's interesting. We have a lot of controversy going on in the Republican Party at the moment. I am very active in that. I am following bills and working with a number of senators, having previously run for the Senate and actually campaigned with those people. If I try to call them, they answer my calls. I'm on their speed dial. We're friends. And that actually makes a difference when you are looking at, bills, legislation, and getting a message through that's hard through email.
And you also have experience being a state rep.
Yes, I spent 2 terms in the House, was considered incredibly effective. I was so effective, in fact, that some people suggested that I run for governor a couple of years ago. And I sent out an email to 10 friends asking what they thought of that suggestion. One of them posted it online. The Democrats ran a fundraiser against me in 12 hours. The press started calling me, and I was a candidate for governor accidentally. So you just never know how this thing's going to go.
Right.
But I've gotten a fair amount of influence in Concord, and I believe that I've helped Litchfield and Manchester incredibly well execute things that matter.
Yes, and you're running for Manchester wards
5, 6, 7, 8, and 9.
Okay, so 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 needs representation.
And you know what? I'm an easy representative to work with because I answer my phone. People are surprised when they call my number. If I miss a call, I call them back. I call out. We go out knocking on doors. We go out leaving flyers. You know that we went out and left flyers explaining the impact of Common Core. My team is very dedicated to doing the right thing. And my team is, of course, my family. I have 2 brothers. I have a sister. I have myself. I have family, friends. That's how you start, right?
And not the big special interests where they want to buy your allegiance to them.
I don't take any special interest money. If somebody wants to give me money and they aren't politically aligned with where I've been publicly, I won't take their money. I didn't take very much money to run for Senate the last time around. I did very, very well. I mean, I lost, and everyone's like, you lost. And I'm like, I lost by 998 votes.
And that district includes Litchfield.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a huge district.
I lost to Donna Soucy in her own ward. She's very popular. And she only beat me by 247 votes in her own ward. I mean, that is incredibly close. They were expecting her to take a landslide.
Right.
So I'm very excited, and I believe that I will bring a lot of influence to the Senate for Manchester and Litchfield. I'll also bring a lot of sanity about doing the right things in government. You have known me for a few years now. I'm very, very consistent. If there's a problem, I listen to all the facts and make good decisions.
You're versed on the budget.
Yes, ma'am.
You have your own business.
Yes, ma'am.
You know what it takes to run a business. So you know the issues up in Concord. Like, for one, is the business enterprise tax, is
And
it?
the business profits tax, yeah.
I mean, what'd they do? They lowered that by, some teeny percent? Does that make a huge impact on the state and the businesses that are here?
Not by raising...
To bring them back?
Yeah, no.
Wherever they went?
It doesn't. We have talked to a number of businesses. There was a small business in Nashua who contacted me. They went out and hired 2 employees for the first time. They did not understand all the paperwork they were supposed to fill out. and they got a $149,000 fine for not going out and doing their paperwork properly. Now, I'm surprised they didn't move over the border. When we got done, I went with them to the Department of Labor. We went and worked it out. We got great for them. They got a settlement. It was $1,500. It was a little slap on the wrist. And they said, go and fix the problem. But these guys got caught because they called the Department of Labor to check to make sure they were doing everything right. And then when somebody told them they were doing it wrong, they went out and fixed it, all proactively on their own, to get fined by the government. Somehow we need a first strike plan in place, which we put in the legislature when I was in there, that says if you make a mistake and you don't know, then you don't get hit with large fines. It's when you are a repetitive offender. I think that stuff is important.
Definitely is. I mean, businesses, we need them to, keep the economy going and keep us employed, and we treat them like crap, really, don't we, in New Hampshire?
Do you know that if we had every small business in the state had one employee, just one, we would have a negative employment rate. I don't mean zero. I don't mean like a drop. I mean negative. We wouldn't have enough employees. Small business is the lifeblood and innovation of New Hampshire. And right now, the largest employer in the state is the state government.
Yeah.
It has expanded dramatically. When you look, the largest industry in New Hampshire is education. But we don't have freedom. We have dictation from the federal government. And so there are lots of challenges. We need to go and wrestle back local control. We need to go out and say, what do we need for our communities and how should we be spending money?
Mm-hmm. So what do you think about this year's budget? The governor's maybe going to veto.
Well, I think the governor will probably veto the budget. And I think that will be an interesting level of work for both the House and the Senate. If they veto the budget, I suspect that when it comes back for a second bite at the apple, many things that are priorities for the governor may end up reduced even more. Because what happens is, I'm sorry to say, when the governor goes out and pushes, she may find that some people push back, and there are new unity groups that say, you know what, we brought in a reasonable budget. And so I suspect that there will be a much leaner budget, more restrictions.
Tell us a little bit, a few of the line items in the budget that or what were some of the things in the budget that you think are important and which are not so important?
Well, I think we actually have to make sure that we always keep our commitments to our employees. We have contracts and such things having to do with collective bargaining that we need to make sure that we keep on track. But we also need to make a strategic shift away from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan that will actually give us a long-term edge in the budget. We need to spend less. Right now, the budgeting process is not done in a way that I would if I were in a business. They go out and budget for an employee at the highest possible rate, rather than going out and budgeting for what the current cost is of their employees.
A fair market, you mean, or?
Well, no. If you have somebody who, if there's a range for doing a job,
Okay.
and it's $40,000 to $70,000, they budget for the top, not for the current pay.
Oh, so then they have a slush fund afterwards?
Yes, exactly.
Because they don't hire at 70, right?
Correct.
Oh my goodness.
And this is a common practice.
Is that right?
Yeah, because what happens is we have to gross appropriate. We can't spend any more than the appropriation. So there are all these little ways they pad the budget.
Oh.
And once you learn sort of the game, it gets more interesting. The other thing we need to do with the budget, which we don't do, is follow the money. When it goes into a department, when it goes to the governor's office and then out to departments, we need to track what they're spending it on versus what they tell us they're spending it on. If you did that in your local school board in Manchester and in Litchfield, you would be surprised at seeing how the money flows. and they make excuses why they can't tell you, or it's too much work, or this or that.
Well, does it take a vote of the legislature to appropriate monies from this to that?
No.
They just do it in the executive?
Correct. What happens is the legislature, just like in your town, let me back up for a second. In your town, or city, your aldermen pick a target budget and say, this is what we believe is the budget, and they appropriate it. Okay? And then they give it to the mayor. And the mayor and his department heads spend it however they want to. There is no obligation for them to do anything in that budget at all. One group selects the amount of money, the other group spends it. And it's called a gross appropriation. So you can't dictate how any of the money is spent. And so in Litchfield, we had this problem of, when I was a selectman, the budget committee going out and saying, we're going to give you money for this, but we're not going to give you money for that. And it was okay. Just, you give us the money and we move it anywhere we wanted to. The only thing you can do in the budgeting process is you can actually set individual line items to 0, and then there can be no appropriation for that item.
By the selectman or the alderman?
Yeah. So
That's called defunding.
Yeah, it doesn't happen very often. We did something interesting in Litchfield a few years ago, which saved us an awful lot of money in the budgeting process. And that was, we went out and said, you have all of these little slush funds in your budget, right? You have put in, let's say you have this video projector, right, that projects on the wall, and they put in the budget a replacement bulb, okay, and the replacement bulb's $400. But all the departments put in that $400. The bulbs don't burn out that often. And so how many times do you need to put that expense in the budget? So we went out and said, reduce it to what you need, remove all the slush funds, and move all the slush fund money over into one place so that we have, you go to the town administrator and you say, I lost this, and he'll get it for you.
Is that called contingency?
No, contingency.
Is something else?
Contingency is something else.
What's it called? Just the general fund?
Yes.
Okay.
And so when we did that, what we found is we got rid of the tiny that add up a lot, repetitive pieces in the budget, and then our department heads knew sort of exactly what they had to do with money, and if they needed more, they could go and ask for it from this other pool. But there was no, we're padding the budget and increasing it by 4% every year because that's what we do.
Right.
I mean, we were having them come in and tell us that the fees per, doing X were, one of the fees they were talking about started out at like $8, and now it was like $17.30. And we're going, well, where'd the number come from? And they said, well, it started back here, and we multiplied it by this percentage and this percentage, and it's been going on since the 80s.
That's it.
And I'm going, well, what does it cost?
Would that be zero-based budgeting?
No.
No?
Zero-based budgeting is when you start at the bottom and you just, add on whatever you need.
Okay.
It's sort of like a layer cake.
Well, we're not really versed in how budgets, we know how we run our home budgets, and everyone runs them different, I suppose. But how government runs budgets, I mean, people really don't know.
Well, the government can go and extract as much money as it needs to accomplish what it believes are its goals. And it just takes, it says, this is how much I need, and then they split the cost among all the people. And that sounds like a great idea. The problem is that the people never get to object. At the ballot box, maybe they get a yes or no, up or down vote. But they don't get to say, I don't like this program, I don't like that program, and get them removed.
That's where we are elected officials, as if you don't like the way these people are spending the money. Well, I suppose the elected officials are just approving the bottom line, right, basically?
Correct.
So then it's the mayor, or it's the town administrator, or...
Yeah. And
we
so
got to watch them.
Well, actually, what we have to do is learn the points in the process by which we can make change. There's one point I'm going to use Litchfield because I'm more familiar with it than Manchester. We have what's called deliberative session day. And so the entire budget and all the warrant articles and everything is decided on as to what's going to go on the ballot. So we can go out and change any of those pieces at that very moment.
At that moment.
And so if people care, if they will take 5 hours out of their year to apply pressure at one point, they can actually make the change they want. But most people don't even know it exists. When we go there, when you subtract out the elected officials, the people who are required to be there, in Litchfield, a community of 9,000 people, just under 9,000 people, we had 8 citizens who weren't there because they were elected or part of the process in the room. That's 1 per 1,000.
They can't complain when their taxes go up.
We put an
How many
explanation.
$100 a year or more sometimes, and
We put an explanation in when Litchfield did their tax reevaluation, because people's appraised value was going to go down, but their tax bills went up. And they were like, well, how come if my value went down? And it's because everyone else's value went down too. And so what they do is they take the total valuation and the total expense, and they divide the total expense by the total valuation and then apply it to whatever is your portion.
right. So you just can't look town to town and say, oh, well, Derry's $23 a thousand and Milford is $28 a thousand, and say, well, it's cheaper in Derry. No, because
No.
it goes by the value of the homes.
It goes by the proportional value of the total property value in a community. Isn't that funny?
So that's not an easy number to find.
No.
To figure out if you're going to want to buy a new home in that town.
I didn't know any of this before I became a selectman, because there's information you can get, but then there's a whole system by which, budgets have to be sent to the State Department of Revenue, and, things get crafted and constructed.
Well, now that we're talking about the money, how about we just talk a little bit about the social programs in the governor's budget and the legislator's budget? And I mean, we do need help. I mean, we are paying taxes to the state, our property tax, 2-point-something%. And I don't think that all goes to education, does it? Or is it mostly education?
Yeah, it goes to mostly education.
Okay, but I mean, should we just keep social programs as a city and town issue, or should the state be involved with funding programs?
I don't think the state should be involved in funding programs unless there's specifically a grant department that goes out and evaluates how they should spend blocks of money.
You
I'm a
talk
big
about
fan
health
of-
and human services,
Well, Health and Human Services is a different
okay.
problem. We'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
Let's talk about LCHIP. Have you heard of LCHIP? The Land and Community Heritage Program? Like, somebody submits a plan, it's going to cost this much, and then they allocate based on whether or not it's a good plan. Health and Human Services, however, is a different animal, a different problem. It gets some of its money from the state, it gets some of its money from the federal government, and they get matching funds. So the more often they can go out and increase costs over here, the more matching funds they get from the federal government. And so if they take money and apply it just the right way, they maximize the return. A couple of years ago when I was first a state rep, I learned about a phrase that really scared me. It was called metascam. And metascam was a government and state government, federal government, and hospital program where the state would charge taxes specifically to the hospitals to increase the hospital bills by a percentage, and then the federal government would actually match the funds for the taxes, and then once the federal government did the match, they would immediately send the taxes back to the hospital, which means they were just using it to jack up the income from the federal government. And the federal government knew, and it's wink, wink, nudge, nudge, because they could actually fit it into some paperwork. And, and I'm going, wait a second, if that was private industry, that would be called fraud. But in state government, you don't call it fraud. You just call it maximizing your revenue. We need to stop doing that. We need to be open. We need to be transparent. We need to go out and say, what is the viability of these programs? We take programs, a lot of the programs having to do with young people who are going into foster care or whatever, and we manage and micromanage them at a very expensive rate. There was a family when I was on redress of grievances in Concord that the children were given to the brother of one of the parents, lived there for 3 years. The brother decided he wanted to adopt the children. And the state said, no, you can't adopt the children. Your family, your house, all of these other things are not appropriate for you to adopt. And they've been living there for 3 years. Okay? How do you get from point A to point B? You can't. And so it's inconsistency. We don't actually run our government in a way that accomplishes necessarily our community goals because we are so regimented within 14,000 pages of rules. It's huge. And the question is, are we ruled better? We don't have common goals and objectives. I know people who are Democrats who are told quite frequently that this is our agenda, you vote this way. If you don't vote this way, they pressure you to do that, or they make sure you don't get elected again. The Republicans sort of behave differently. There are two different factions in the Republican Party in New Hampshire right now, which is very obvious in our legislature.
You want to go there?
Oh, let's go there.
Talk about the article in the Union Leader?
Have you seen it? I brought you a copy, but had you seen it
No,
before?
I hadn't seen it.
It says, GOP chair, that's the Republican chair, has no trust in Frank Ginta. And I went, wow. And I went out and read the FEC documents about what happened with Frank Ginta. And Frank Ginta's family had a checking account. And they loaned money to his campaign for him to run. But because they didn't go out the day before, they transferred the money over and list him as a co-signer on the account. They say he couldn't have the money. Now, this was reviewed. This is not this election cycle. This is
I know. How many
years
years ago?
Right? But it's come up because they say, well, we don't like his answers. Well, the reason in which it became a question again is because he got reelected again. Nobody cared when he wasn't in office.
Right.
And Jennifer Horn is saying this is all about integrity. Well, integrity is about what you do all the time, and are you consistent? Frank has consistently said, it was my money. His mother, who was in charge of the money and wrote the check, says it's his money. So the family says, yeah, it was his. He's put money in, he's taken money out.
It's a recording issue, is it not?
Yeah.
How it's recorded?
Yep. But I was at a dinner with Jennifer Horn a week before, and she sat on the podium, stood on the podium, and she said, we need party unity. We need to make sure we don't have Republicans attacking other
We
Republicans
don't eat our own.
and tearing each other down.
Right. I mean,
She said, we need to be the party of accountability. I have that on video. I'll share it with you. It's great because, it's a great speech. But my wife is sitting next to me. She takes out her cell phone. And you know what you follow my wife on Facebook, right? Did you see the post? I wish I'd worn hip waders. I mean, she was offended sitting there because she has seen it from the other side, and it's all hypocrisy. Okay, I actually believe we should rebrand the Republican Party, okay, from the elephant to the hippo.
I mean, really, huh?
And so
what did Frank do to deserve all this?
Actually,
Really? Because there's obviously another issue.
yeah. I'm not supposed to say what the other issue is.
No, we don't probably want to go there.
We don't. But I will say this. I called for the resignation of the GOP chairman, Jennifer Horn, this on Saturday on Granite Rock, which is the conservative network. Because if we're having a presidential primary going on right now, I don't want to have someone in charge who wants to and can put their thumb on the scale about who the candidates are going to be. In the last election cycle, the Republicans, before the primary, are not supposed to do anything to help any of the candidates. Supposed to give them access, but really you're not supposed to push any. What I found funny is the chairman of the Republican Party in Litchfield was told he needed to go and do introductions for Scott Brown.
Ah.
And he said no. And he was brought into a room with a few people and went to a meeting.
Oh, my goodness.
And they said-
Strong-arming in the Republican Party.
Yeah. And so he went out and endorsed his favorite candidate in that race. And they told him he had to resign. Okay? And so back to the hypocrisy.
Right.
How much of this is going on? And when you look at the way that they have structured the control, they make sure the people who can make the decisions and aren't going to call them out are in, and the people who are going to hold them to be accountable are out. My wife and I both ran for office in the last election cycle, as you know, and it was somewhat disappointing that when they were going out to select the state committee, they picked who they thought should be state committee members and recommended them, and they took the people who also wanted to be state committee members. My wife and I didn't make the top list. Been committee members for years. I mean,
Isn't
8
that
years.
voted, though? Isn't that a vote?
We
Or-
vote for delegates,
Delegates.
and then the delegates vote to see who are going to be the state committee members.
Oh, okay.
And so we didn't make the list of people who are going to be state committee members for the first time in 8 years. And I'm going, huh? And then I lost the election. But I lost the election to write-ins. So I'm a little confused. When I asked to see the ballots, I was told that they were not viewable, so that was the end of the discussion. And so what we have is a process that lacks transparency and accountability. And it's got to go. Because if we play that game, we do not do a service to the presidential primary process. We don't do service to the credibility of the party. And you know what? You're in Concord. You're only as good as your word. And if our chairman of our party, if her word's no good, then the entire party's word is no good.
We're already fractioned and split in some, in many ways, and if we can't even rally around the chairman or in any way find cohesive, coming together, this party will never come together.
No.
Not with leadership like that.
Oh, actually, I like to
Throwing Ginta under the bus.
I like to call it Earthship, in fact, because I don't see any lead coming out of there. Jennifer Horn, does not have her own house in order, both in terms of the party and in her personal situation. She has a lot she should be focusing on personally. She's going to be in court on Wednesday for, personal items.
Yeah.
She needs to focus.
Right. Well, we need somebody to help bring the party together.
Well,
and
I have
not continue to divide it.
I have gone out and am collecting the list of state party members who are going to call for a new election for the GOP party chair.
Yeah.
That's
got to be done.
Yep. And we see that list building very quickly.
Okay.
Then we're going to go out and make sure that we have the votes to overturn the party chair. And when we do, we will submit that letter to the state executive board, and then we will show up knowing we're going to win.
Okay.
And when we get there, it'll be a foregone conclusion.
All right. Well, George, we'll have you on again.
Thank
and
you
we have
so
plenty of
very
time
much.
before the next election for Senate. Appreciate you being on today. Senate District 18, Manchester Wards 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and Litchfield.
Yes,
I appreciate having you.
Thank you. And anytime you have a question,
All right. Thank you, folks.
call me.
Thank you, folks. Get in touch with George, and take care till next time.